Thank you. I love that. Their greatest need is us. I love that. I love that. Um, are we going to keep going alphabetically, or Kwame and Tony, you're going to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, obviously, my father and my grandfather and my stepfather. Although my mother was a single mother, my father was very active, both in my life and as a role model. However, just giving a nod to any single moms that are tuning in, I want to answer this in a way that gives that nod. My mother was very intentional and methodical about what Black men engaged with me, what Black men had a role and played a role. My mother worked 3 jobs for much of my life. And so the times when she could not be available or be present, she was acutely aware of what I was doing, and who was facilitating that time. So whether it was the Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, track coach, people at church, the choir, whatever. Even at one point, until I revolted, the Big Brothers Association, she saw a commercial on television and I was in that for a minute. I mean, so I think all of that was just very, very strategic on her part. And so I think all those people, and like Brother Jeff, I can name these names. That's how influential they were to me. And the list is very, very long. It's like a relay. And it took a group of people, it took a series of connections and relationships to get me to the next level, whether it was 6th grade, to high school, from high school to college, and even if it was a summer, whatever the transitional period was. And then also consistently present, obviously, was my father, was my grandfather, was picking me up from school to take me home, to bring me home. I was bused to school. I went, from, all Black neighborhoods out to Roxbury to go to all white high schools, so, it was very calculated, very methodical, very intentional. And so I was very fortunate in that way. And like Jeff, I'll just take a stab at what I think some of the needs are, and I'll just stick to my lane. I just think in terms of education, what is needed for our Black youth is just a hospitable environment. We need to meet our children where they are, while understanding that the environment that we bring them into is also charged with taking them to where we know they will go, right? And giving them the skill sets for them to be successful post the educational experience. And not always is that environment hospitable. And having worked in higher ed at 2 historically Black colleges, where most of the time the environment was hospitable, the environment was never the problem. There were other barriers and other issues that we had to deal with as administrators and faculty. And now in this latter part of my career, I've been at 2 predominantly white institutions, and the environment for the most part and the climate is very much the problem. And when I see us come in, whether it's BIPOC faculty, staff, or students, that is the issue. And so for me, it's just the hospitable environment. It is, just helping my white colleagues and my white counterparts in the same space understand the difference between approaching situations from an achievement gap paradigm to an opportunity gap paradigm. There's a big difference. And as an educator, I'm constantly trying to help people understand that it is not an achievement gap issue. It's an opportunity gap issue. And so much, and it's hard to do that work. It's hard to make that case. Oftentimes when you're both the object and the subject of the conversation of injustice in that kind of space. And so for me, that is the problem, because a lot of times when we talk about our children, we're talking about ourselves. When you think about a leadership structure that I'm a part of, where there's only 2 of us that look like me, that are trying to resolve these issues of climate and inclusivity and equity. So I am also the object and the subject of the very conversations around hospitable environments for our students. And so for me, I think that is really one of the greatest needs.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Kwame?
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna answer the second question first.
Okay, no problem.
Like Anthony said, sticking in, staying in my lane, just providing them with a safe place, provide them with a safe place where they feel comfortable to actually talk about what's going on. And the first thing that came to my mind is patience. We need
Mm.
patience with the youth because wow, okay, they 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 will test your patience. They say the root word of patience, pati, Latin root, means to suffer with calmness, patience, and then also just to push them past their limits and not let them take the easy way out and make sacrifices and persevere to get them to look long term and not look so much short term. Far as mentor, wow. Everything I do is through myths. We use a lot of quotes. In myth, you'll find that the hero never accomplishes their task alone. They always have assistance from some sort of guide, some sort of mentor. They say a Sufi quote says, "He who travels without a guide needs 200 years for a 2 days journey." They say water picks up the sediment of the channel in which it travels. And my favorite, you make your friends your teachers and you mingle the friendly art of conversation with the advantages of instruction. I grew up all black neighborhood on Akron, Ohio, Store Avenue between Lawton and Slauson. It was a time when all fathers were in the neighborhood. I'll be 63 in a couple weeks. So I was born in 58. But my father, wow. My father's 94, my mother's 92. But my father was definitely my mentor. He was like big man on campus. He's a sports star. He ran a neighborhood youth program. So he like literally employed like 1,000 youth. And then my sister, she's like 11 months older than me, but she had like boyfriends who were older. So um, I used to hang around them like eighth grade. I'm hanging around seniors, and then just going to the playground every day from where my father ran the programs and just hanging out with older dudes every day. And my cousins, we got the second largest black family here in Akron. So my cousins Marco and Dino, and then I worked at Goodyear, man, like my father's friend. So I just been blessed all my life with wow, just mentors to assist me in my journey. When I wrote my dissertation, I went back to the beginning of my life and thanked everybody who assisted me in where I got right now. And I had three and a half, I think 2.5 pages single space of just thanking everybody. So wow, just wow, I'm just wow, just blessed. So yeah, these are some
That's
beautiful
great.
questions you have, Sharon.
Oh,
Beautiful.
no problem. Thank you. Thank you. Greg, do you have any thoughts on what you think our young people, what their greatest need is in this moment?
Yeah. After both of my careers in law enforcement and now as an attorney allows me to interact and see youth essentially, doing doing damage control, where systems and structures have failed them, and now they as a result of not getting the training or mentoring or that they could have benefited from, that they make poor choices and end up in a situation where they get sucked into the big maw of the criminal justice system. And one of my pastor, A.R. Bernard at the Christian Cultural Center, one of the things he says is that relationship precedes ministry. And oftentimes I've found that these young people, they while they might have superficial access to people who have wisdom and have, who could offer good counsel and good advice, that advice and that counsel is of no effect because there's no relationship between the young person and that person and the person who could ostensibly provide them with some guidance. And I liken it to a nobleman, riding by on his horse, stopping for a minute and throwing some crumbs or coins of advice to you, and then riding away again. And I think that that's what happens to a lot of our youth, because the the stresses and pressure of life sometimes don't allow adults to invest, the time that's required to create a relationship. And harkening back to my opening statement about the men on my block, the hour that it might take to change a battery in a car, or change the oil in a car while a kid stands nearby, you talk to him, that creates a relationship, that creates trust, that creates a forum which now the adult can pour knowledge and wisdom into that young person. And so and I, it's like being, when you're a parent, you have, hopefully you're going to have time with your kids, and so to create a relationship with your kids that will result in you being able to minister to them, and them accepting, the wisdom and stuff that you want to give them. And I think what our youth need is that adults who are willing to sacrifice time to build relationships with those young people, so that you can sow into their lives, tend the flowers, and then one day, view a harvest or reap a harvest. And so, and I don't want to be too esoteric in that answer, but I just realized over the course of time, that's what it takes, is time. And just a quick anecdote. Recently, I got a call from an intentional single mom who was intent and directed and purposeful of doing the best for her son. And she wanted me to have a consultation with her. But interestingly enough, the young man hadn't been the subject of an arrest, but she saw that he was getting into issues and problems that it was very likely that a brush with law enforcement resulting in his arrest was almost inevitable. And she was willing to invest financially to try to bring me to come to the home and chat with the young man, because his father had passed away, and just take some time to interact with him, and because I was an attorney, and explain some things to him, and plainly speak to him some about the law and about the consequences and whatnot. So I think that that's what our youth need. They need time. They need relationships with people who mean them well, and who have the patience to like I said, sow seeds of life into them.
Thank you. So that's a perfect segue actually into two questions, but I'll start with the more specific one. So some of you have children. Some of you have sons. Others of you have both sons and daughters. Can you speak to relationships specifically with girls? Because, we hear a lot of these adages. I think one of the ones that I floated was, it takes a man to raise a man. So a boy needs a man in order to become a man. And so to me, the other side of that would suggest that, number one, a boy doesn't need a womanly influence in his life, number one, and that a girl doesn't need a man's influence, that a girl can become a woman just through what she learns from her mother. And I wouldn't be as fearless, I guess, if it weren't for my father's influence. So can you talk about your experiences and your observations working with boys or male youth, girls or female youth at whatever age? Are there different needs? How do you approach the different issues they might come to you with? Is there a difference? Is there something different that happens or that is required in tending to either, and I'm being very cisgender about it. What about trans youth? What about LGBTQ youth? So that hard and fast rule of boys need a man, and can you just riff on that for a minute, and how you approach raising both sons and daughters, or dealing with both sons and daughters, etc. And anybody can jump in on that.
Well, I'll start. So I have a son and I have a grandson. And I'm also in higher ed, which I think a lot of us in higher ed sometimes think that we are sort of partners in the raising of other people's children. So I can tell you in 20 years how many times I've watched parents screech away out the driveway of campus while they drop their sons and daughters off freshman week, and they're just like, "Hey, see you later," you know. So and that the symbolism and the optics of that is always just sometimes hilarious, because it speaks to so many different possible family dynamics. But I will say this: it is always difficult raising a human, just period, and raising someone that will grow up and be humane and kind and never mind intelligent, and thoughtful and considerate, and all the things that if you look up what humane means, right? It's just difficult doing that if you have not had that yourself, whether that came from a mom raising you or a dad raising you or both parents present, because I know all kinds of family dynamics where the result has been ignorant adults, right? So for me, it don't matter, right? But what it does take is intentionality. And that's back to an earlier statement I was making about my own mom. And I know we all feel the way we feel about our parents, but I think my mom gets the best mom in the world award, because her every being was to love me to death. And a part of that responsibility was to make sure that I was kind and I was humane. And part of that was the teaching of the Bible. And that was that I knew who Martin Luther King and others were, and that I knew who Fannie Lou Hamer was, and that I knew who Langston was and Zora, you know. And you can't read all these people and understand at the core of these people and not understand at the end of the day, you know, because like I said earlier, we are everywhere we've ever been. And if part of where we've been has been sitting in a corner somewhere because you're on punishment, and your punishment is to understand humility, and you have to write it 1,000 times before you can leave that room. And to go with that lesson of writing humility 100 times, you got to read the life of someone called Sojourner Truth. I mean, come on, right? So it's not about, you know, one person in the home or two people in the home or whatever, but it's the intentionality. And that goes back to your question about, you know, whether we're raising boys or girls or the pronoun. It's about raising good people. And fast forward, having had that kind of background, and being in a position of leadership, or also whether it's me being a faculty member in front of other people's children, I take that responsibility very seriously. I have been in situations where I have, especially in my time teaching at historically Black colleges, where I totally understand some of the pain some students come to school with, where the trauma of having to leave for Thanksgiving because there really is nowhere to go. And they're loitering around your office because the schools and the dorms are closing. And for that week that the campus is breaking down, there is literally nowhere to go. Or they're very super bright 4.0 and they have the interview of a lifetime to go to Wall Street, but they don't have a blue suit to even go to the interview with on campus. And the armchair advising that we do at some of these Black schools, and on that weekend, I don't get paid to go take nobody to Walmart and buy them no suit, but I did it, right? Or bring somebody over to my house, but I do. Now we got Title IX and all kind of stuff. I don't know if I'll do it today, but there are ways in which we support our own, and there is, you know, you can tell when someone has not had a figure like you in their lives, and you step in to be that in the best way that you can, given the parameters in which you can engage with a student. So you bring your whole self to your commitment and to your role. And I don't know if I'm directly answering your question, but I really firmly believe, and it's been maybe a part of my success or the evolution of my career, that people who have supervised me have recognized that about me, that my commitment is tied to what I believe. My commitment and my good work ethic is tied to the way in which I work and the way in which the people that I engage respond to the way in which I work, and that is authentic. And a really recent example, and I've been in Boston for 7 years, is I come from the South. I came to Boston from Atlanta, where we speak and we say good morning, and we say, how are you? And we mean it, right? And we will stand there and wait for the answer in the hallway. And when I arrived to Massachusetts, that was pretty rare for people and pretty awkward. Like, oh, like, hey, I said hi. And I'm like, no, but I said, and how are you doing? Right? Or we call people sister, how you doing this morning, sister? How you doing? You know, or I'm a hugger because I come from the South, right? And it took people time to get used to that body language, to that posture. And now I forgot that I have people have drunk the Penda Kool-Aid. And if I forget the hug, or if I forget this, you know, and look, everybody does it now, you know, so it's just a testament to you are infectious, and you can be a way that is refreshing to people. That you're the something that people have been waiting for, and they didn't even realize it, right? And so it's the same thing with our youth. And in education, you don't get the luxury of teaching the people that you have in your head, or you don't get the luxury of teaching your content in the way you have envisioned it, right? You have to teach the people you get, and you have to teach the students you get, and you have to be good enough and bad enough to pivot on a dime, because the 30 students you get this semester could be dramatically different than the 30 that just walked out the door at the end of last semester, right? And that means diversity, that means sexuality, that means color, that means religion, that means whatever. Because just like you bring everything to the situation for teaching and administration, they're bringing everything they've ever been to the learning process as well, right? And so for me, it really doesn't matter, right? And so I just think it's really all about intention.
I love that. I love that. Kwame, what about you? Because you, over the past, I guess, 5 years, maybe, expanded Alchemy to include modules for girls.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
and can you address, you know, like what was your reasoning behind that, and
Okay.
how did you see that was needed
Okay. My
as a
reasoning.
Black man?
Yeah, my reasoning behind it, because whenever I would go present, first question would always be, how can they get their, our program in their city? And the second question was always, when are you going to start a program for girls? So that's why I started. So we're in our 3rd year now. But I have women facilitators running the groups for girls. Like before I started Alchemy, I'd work with all girls I ran one group for girls and 6th graders. And then I ran 2 groups for girls, 6th graders at Perkins Middle School, but that was like in 2003. All I do now is work with boys. I mean, it's it's different. And girls are different nowadays. Okay, because why? They just exposed to so much. And here again, when I was growing up, everybody had a father in the family. I used to work with prior to starting Alchemy, I worked with high school dropouts in Akron and Cleveland, and I also ran groups, 4 separate groups in a halfway house for brothers either on their way to prison or just getting out. I ran 4 separate groups, 20 men each. 90% of those brothers didn't have fathers in their lives. The high school dropouts that I worked with, 80% of them, 90% of them didn't have fathers in their lives. The Alchemy youth, 80% of them didn't have fathers in their lives. But the brothers in the halfway house and the high school dropouts, the fact that they were high school dropouts and either on their way to prison or just getting out, that's not coincidence. Okay, that's not coincidence that they didn't have a father there. I think you need both. Okay, so whether a father is in your life or not, I think you still need some sort of man there, to help you. They say that you can't teach somebody something you don't know, and you can't lead them somewhere where you yourself are unwilling to go. So by the same token, I think, boys need a mother in their life too, just because, there's men and women, that you're going to be with when you grow up. All right. So you need to get a understanding of both. But I think here again, going back to that quote, I think it's really important for for a man to be into the life of a boy, and I think it's important, for a mother to be into the life of a girl. But you got to have influence for both. And then I want to say one other thing. What Anthony's saying, he's saying he got the best mother in the world. They say comparisons are never justified, but you only find justification through comparison. I got the best mother in the world. All right?
We ain't fighting today. Today's love day. We don't fight. We don't fight. We just praising all the mothers. Praise all the mothers.
Yeah. So obviously I think you need both. Yeah.
Jeffrey, you're the one. You have what, 5 children you're by yourself?
We have 5 children. Yes. We yes, very much so. And I'm contributing to the Best Mother Club too. My mom's 92.
Woo!
They still have her here in the space. My mama's so good that on my birthday, I get her flowers. She's the one that did all the work on that day. Years ago, I try to get the young people to say, listen, let's adopt a new practice. And one of my great role models and teachers and mentors, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, we know him as Dr. Ben, traveled to Kemet or Egypt with Dr. Ben a couple of times. And he would tell the brothers that he's like, on your birthday, you really need to celebrate the Black woman because she's the one that did the work. You just came out. So I got one of those. And I think that says a lot. I think it puts us, it squarely contextualizes the conversation. I think the way I treat women and the way I learned to treat women is directly tied to my relationship with my mother. There are things that I saw with my father and my mother that I can look back and say, wait a minute, there may have been something going on there. But we never saw them at each other's throats. We never saw them disagree, but there were some points where it was uncomfortable. Then I became a man and had a relationship with my father. And for those of you who know, whether you're dealing with a married father or single fathers, that relationship, the conversation you have with your dad when you're a grown man is a little bit different than the conversation you had as a boy growing up. And when you look back, you say, wait a minute, you might have been in a conflicting space with my mom during that time. And they say, yeah, welcome to manhood, son. My dad would teach me extra lessons then. He would say things like, cool heads prevail. He would say things like, there's only one thing faster than the speed of light and the speed of sound, and that's a change of mind. It happens so quickly that you can't judge it. You can't scientifically quantify it. Those are lessons that I did learn from being with him, but being with my uncles, from being with the people who are role models. I think the short answer to the question is yes. You need men to teach other men. We need that. When I was running a rites of passage program called Becoming Heru back in the 1990s at Edge Hill Center and at Bethlehem Center with the Men of Distinction, we clearly had 2 sides of the story. One side was the women who were looking at the story, the girls who were looking at the story of Aset in mythology, tossed to Brother Kwame, and the men looking at the story of Asar, or the story of Isis and Osiris, and how this pattern of womanhood or manhood falls into a category that is separated by gender. Now, I'm not getting into the space of orientation, whether you consider yourself binary, non-binary, all of the modern language, it's great, it's fine. That's something else. When we talk about what it means to, and if I'm a new kind of minister, I'm a different kind of minister, I'm less of a preacher, I'm more of a minister. I've always tell people that. But, there are things that you learn, like how to not zip your stuff up in your pants, that boys have conversations about with older men. There are things that my dad would say to me, and that men, guys in the neighborhood, older guys would say in the neighborhood, when you're getting ready to do something stupid, and they say, hey man, hold off, don't do that. Don't talk to that girl like that. Don't talk to her because I have a sister, and you're not gonna talk to my sister like that, or I'm gonna whip you. That's role model behavior that you get from being with same gender. When we talk about rites of passage, I like some of the work that Malidoma Patrice Sommet talks about in his book, Ritual. He says there are 3 stages of this, right? There's separation, there's ordeal, and then there's homecoming. So when we talk about rites of passage, there has to be some space of transition from youth to adulthood. There's a stage there where you have to separate. You have to go through some kind of ordeal. This is why we love fraternities and sororities, and we love to pledge. It puts us in an ordeal space. And then we experience the homecoming when we get back into it. Absent that rites of passage, we tend to do things like join gangs. It offers us the same space. So May talks about, though, in the gangs that the modern gangs, new gangs, there's never a homecoming with a larger community. So because of that, we never make this connection that tells us we're part of something large and something that's better. I was at a conference in the 90s. I can't remember this sister's name. She pointed out something that stuck with me forever. And I'm leaving this here because I always operate in my lane too. And my lane is started, blended family, had kids together. So my wife and I have 5 children, a daughter that's 26, son that's 19, son that's 15, a daughter that's 11, daughter that's 9. So, you know, we got the spectrum of all of this, and this energy in raising kids and teaching kids. It all begins at home for me. I can't go out and tell other folks how to raise their kids if I'm not pouring into mine. But one thing that I've learned from this sister in the conference in the 90s, she said, because we as a people were stripped of our process of rites of passage wholesale, we end up using our relationships as rites of passage. So we end up learning the things that we need by experiencing over and over what we don't need. Whereas if we have a space where we have women going into the red tent ceremony and teaching the young people what it means, the young women what it means. I can't teach my daughter. I had to call my mom because my oldest daughter was from a previous relationship. I had the custody at the time. When she came to me and said, Baba, hey, I'm experiencing some issues here and I'm starting what I think may be the cycle. We have open conversations, but at some point I called my mom, I called my sister. I said, listen, take her in the room and have the conversation. Why? Because I don't know what that's like. And it would be disingenuous, it would be arrogant, and it would be cocky for me to think that I can have that conversation with her about something that is specific to her coming into her womanhood. So I think those same conversations come with men. And when you have that, you tend to have a better balance, because then I can teach my daughters. When my daughters say, I want to marry somebody like you, I say, I've done a good job. When my sons say, I want to marry something like you, mama, that's great. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're dealing with having a quote unquote nuclear family these days, because now we have a wide range of family units. But what we do know is there's something to be said about having a space where people can learn experientially from people who've been through it, who can then keep the next generation from having to bump their heads so much.
Thank you for that. Greg, did you have any insights about that, about different needs of boys versus girls, and where your work might come into play there?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a tough question that you ask initially, because there's a tension between the ideal and the practical reality. You know, I was a public defender in Manhattan, in New York, for 10 years, and I represented hundreds of clients, and the upwards of 90% of them were Black men, you know, young, ranging in age from 16 to into their 60s. But the one thing they all had in common was either they didn't know their father, the father had abandoned them when they were young, the father had passed away. They had no relationship with the father. So much so that if a father was present and did come to court, that client of mine was an outlier because it was just so rare. So, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner of law, but I think the reality is that, yes, boys need men. A boy needs a man in order to teach him to be a man. And that's saying that is not a slight on a woman who, through no choice of her own, is in a situation where she's, in a position where she has to raise a boy, a man-child by herself. But I think the reality is that a man, I have a 14-year-old son, And when I have conversations with him, I think back to my youth, because my father was in the household, but he was working 2 and 3 jobs. So he was never home. And when he was home, he was sleeping, and my mother would say, "Be quiet, your father's sleeping. He's got to go to work." And that was where the men on the block, filled that gap. I think it's one thing for a mother to say, "Wash your behind, put on deodorant." And it's another thing for a man to tell him, "Boy, you think you're going to talk to some girl smelling like that? You need to go wash your ass and put on some deodorant," And because when it comes to something simple like grooming, I can't quantify it, but just a man explaining that to a teen is different from a mother saying it. And again, I can't quantify it. I couldn't, maybe that's something for one of you to do a book on. But it's and then you think back to, some of the panelists are well versed in cultures of ancient cultures, and who the men were teaching the boys to be men, to be warriors, to farm, to herd cattle, and whatnot. So yes, I think that it's absolutely necessary, and more so for in our community, because at the risk of engaging in hyperbole, a war is being waged on us, and we need to train up our young men in the way that they should go. We need to train them to stand up straight, to look people in the eye, to shake hands firmly, to speak clearly, to don't get flustered, articulate, your intention, your goal, anything because before the war becomes physical, it's psychological. And I always try to explain that to my son. You have to be able to present yourself in a manner that presents a defense, that buys you time, that enables you to navigate through a situation, and that so many of our young men find themselves in because they never had anyone to tell them, stand up straight, look him in the eye, shake hands firmly, speak clearly, speak up, So and the other part of your question was as it relates to girls. And I say, you know what? Girls need a man too, not to teach them how to be a girl, but I think that for more reasons than we could debate the reasons for from now until eternity, but it somehow, our society has a thinking that men shouldn't play the role that they should play, in the lives of their children. I mean, a man who is who's loving and humane and kind and respectful to a woman, a girl teaches her, gives her a standard to measure other men by, so that she won't, hopefully, ideally, can avoid issues and problems with young men, because she'll be able to see the red flags right away, just by virtue of the fact she's seeing things that she didn't see in her own father. And so again, I'm just dealing with practical, in base practical primal terms. But yes, I think it's doubly important in our community. And again, those men could be uncles, they could be sports coaches, they could be neighbors, as long as they're well-intentioned, that their heads are on straight, and they mean the young person well, and they're not trying to exploit them or exploit, the absence of a father figure in that child's life, which unfortunately happens all too often. But that's how I view that issue. These are some tough questions you're putting out here, though, Sharon. They're great questions.
Before I get married, I just want to say, wow, thanks. This is so refreshing. We know there's other black men out there doing things, but wow, just to listen to you brothers, man, and to be here with y'all, man. Hey, man, just thank y'all for the work y'all doing. Okay, man. Okay, man, just thanks. Okay. And like Anthony was saying, wow, so many of the youth, I give them credit for just getting up every day. Okay, for the things that they have to deal with. So yeah, man, this is just beautiful. It's refreshing to be here. Refreshing.
Hey, I'm refreshed. And to that point, some of the very things that you were talking about, Gregory, they're not only things that boys need to learn. Girls need to learn. Stand up straight, look people in the eye, shake that hand firmly. It's not exclusive to boy children. So for me, those very things that are important for Black male youth to learn, you know, it's important for me to know that too, right? I need to look people in the eye. And I think because sometimes our approaches are gendered, this is why women have a hard time in the workplace asking for a raise, because nobody taught them, no, you know your worth. You stand up, you say, you know, whatever. So I appreciate that even if Black men don't see it, that example is just as powerful and necessary for our Black youth who identify as female. Because without putting gender in it, if we go back to, you know, Jeff, you're talking about Aset and Asar and Kwame, you're talking about alchemy. If we're talking about energy, then we need both energies. So if we can suspend our concepts of gender, then we all need both energy. And we get those in various degrees from whoever our influences are. And so I didn't ask the question to be tough. Ha ha ha, Greg. It was an honest question because to me, and maybe this is why I ain't married, I got big masculine energy because my father was like, didn't say, no, you bake the cookies and the boys will be, he's like, figure stuff out, think for yourself, you know. So those kind of qualities that we associate with being masculine, you know, we all need those. And I would love for whoever's writing the books about it to not circumscribe it so much. If I had to only depend on one influence, I'd be a very different person. So I ask that not to trip you all up, but because it's a form of appreciation, actually, because I appreciate that I have had that influence in my life. So we are at about 4 o'clock and I want to start taking questions. So I will get to that last little question. Where can you identify maybe a missed opportunity in your work to influence our young people in some way? And where is your greatest accomplishment, do you think?
Hey, I'm gonna go first on this. Hey, what I meant to say earlier, man, I love you brothers. Okay, man, love y'all. Okay, love you brothers. All right, love you too, Sharon. Obviously, wow, but man, love y'all, Black men. Um, uh, the opportunities, too many to mention. With me running a nonprofit in the 17 years, we only had one fundraiser because I don't like asking people for money. So I don't know how many opportunities I missed out on. Okay, but like I tell people, alchemy was successful in spite of me, not because of me. Okay, so the opportunities, I can't imagine how many opportunities I missed out on because being an ED, I didn't know. They say before you set your sights too high on anything, see how happy those are who already possess it. I didn't know what I was getting into being an ED. Being an ED, you need to be comfortable asking for money, and you need to be comfortable promoting your program. And I didn't do either one of those. Okay, so I missed out on another numbers of opportunities. But man, the thing you said something about
Your greatest accomplishment?
greatest accomplishments. The alchemy youth, the ones like I said, we get them sixth grade, keep them till they graduate from high school. So our oldest group right now is like 28. Okay, and we got about out of our first group, 24 out of 26 went to college. 13 of those graduated with bachelor's degrees. 4 have master's degrees. Just last week, one graduated with a dual MBA and Juris Doctorate.
Was that Brandon?
Yeah, Brandon. We have 2 more in grad school, but what I'm so proud of is the ones who are fathers. We got about 7 of them who are fathers, and wow, you just see their pictures on Facebook. and just the love that they have for their children. Okay. I don't really take any credit for the academic piece because I think a lot of them would have been okay without alchemy, but there's no question that they are beautiful fathers because of being in alchemy for so many years. So that's
That's
what
great.
yeah.
That's great.
That and the other thing I'm most proud of is when I worked at Goodyear in the mail room, I used to get the chocolate blimps and the jackets and stuff and go into the factory and give all the brothers the calendars, okay? With all them rich folks on Mahogany Road, they could get whatever they want. I would take them to the factory and give them to the brothers. That's one of the things I'm most proud of. And that's the honest to God truth.
I hear you. I hear you. Who else? Anybody? Anybody?
Well, just to keep the ball rolling, you know, and I'm not being funny or difficult. I think that the missed opportunity, stating what your missed opportunity is a conversation for, that's a deathbed declaration, you know.
At when I hear brothers say, "What's wrong with the women, man?" And women just, I say, which women? Let's reframe that, because my sister is stellar. My mama is the best mama in the world, right? The sisters that I get to be on a daily basis. There's a Sharon Johnson that we're on here with. I said, you need to check the sisters that you're around. So when we're in a circle like this, let's make sure that people understand when they either watch this replay or have this conversation, these are the brothers. These are the men. We're not an anomaly. We're here. We just have to make sure that people understand that in this conversation that sparks from a space of lack, we have to make sure that we stick our heads up and say, you know, hey, just so you know, we are here. We may not be working our thumbs as much on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and making all of the videos, but it's because we're in the trenches doing the actual work that we'll never get credit for. People sit in the campus center and tweet about what's wrong in the world, but they're able to tweet in the campus center about what's wrong in the world because they got an Anthony Pender behind the scenes pulling the paperwork that he needed to pull to make sure they could be in school, sitting in there. The same with Brother Greg in the legal space, the same with Brother Kwame. So we're in this space, right? And when I think about missed opportunities, I always tell people I try not to have any regrets because a regret can only come from a lesson that you didn't learn. So anything that was in the lost column for me, I always change that word from lost to lesson. What's the lesson? And when I was younger, we had this program at a school around the corner from one of the hardest, toughest zip codes there. And this brother, Dr. Jerome Morris, who is a phenomenal intellect, and we ran this program. He was in grad school. I was out working in the community center. We got 3 or 4 brothers together, and we went to this school. And we said, we want to do a group for young boys, and we'll come in and work with you. And he said, we don't have any money. That's the first thing they said. Well, we don't need the money. Well, we don't have a space to make for you. And so we got sparked. We said, do y'all have an activity period? And they said, yeah. They said, well, do you have any kids, black boys, who are so bad that they get put out of all the activity periods? And they said, yeah, we do. I said, can we have those boys? Just instead of activity periods, send them to us and we'll come in. They were glad to dump them off. But for a period of 2 years, we were able to come and show up and work with them and provide guidance. And guys, when I say this, y'all will all know, it's not like you have to petition for $1 billion grant to do anything. The simple act of taking somebody to a football game or buying pizza for them and sitting down and talking to them, you don't know the influence that it could have. So I say that to say, when I think back, probably 5, 6 years afterwards, after we got through with that program, because the principal changed, they didn't want people coming in. We looked on the news, and one of the kids who was at that time about 17, he had gotten involved in I think it was a carjacking, and he had shot somebody. And I'll never forget that feeling of saying, man, if we would have been able to hang on there, could we have kept him from walking down that path? And anytime that happens, you know, you look back and you feel it, because you remember when they were just a little kid trying to shake people from right to left on the basketball court, and they weren't so influenced. But again, he had the separation, he had the ordeal, He got involved with people who embraced him because he didn't have models around. I'd say the greatest opportunity or the greatest thing that I got from me now is the moment that I accepted walking in divine purpose, and that put me in alignment with who I am, and it put me in alignment with my family. That's a great accomplishment for me. That's an important space for me. My spiritual community is important because we decided to create safe spaces for people where young people can feel protected. Anybody that goes Infinity will tell you that if there's any question of anybody that works with young people, I'm going to be the guy. And as positive as I am, I'm going to make sure, listen, we're dealing with making sure that we're building on the future. So anybody that comes here has to be safe with putting their kids in a program. They have to feel that they can come into a space and people aren't going to be trying to holler at their woman, or you come into a space. And I mean, I'm just talking real talk here because this is the kind of stuff that gets secret and it causes problems. So that opportunity to create and hold space and maintain those spaces has been a great opportunity for me. And I don't take it for granted.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Pender.
Yeah, well, I'm a echo my brother Jeff. I love you guys, and more than you know, because I as I said earlier, I'm currently in a predominantly white space, and I don't have many opportunities like this moment to just share and fellowship with just us, where it's just a comfort to be the subject and the object. This is refreshing. Usually it's awkward. So this is amazing, and I love you for it, and I'm looking forward to staying connected, and continuing this dialogue and being of service and resource to each other. And for me, to the question, I think the blessing about getting older is that you suddenly have an epiphany at some point, and you realize that everything that has happened was supposed to have happened the way it happened. And so there really has been no missed opportunity, because I have learned as much from things that didn't go well or things that in the moment might have felt missed. I've learned more from those moments than I learned from the things that I was jumping up and down about and had parties over or took a drink over. So, but I will say the thing that I am working the most at now is being the kind of leader that it necessitates for this moment. And in this moment, unlike other periods of my life and career, I've always had people, fortunately, since my 20s, have always, and I'm 57 now, I've always had people report to me, which is a blessing, and which is, I guess, a sense of accomplishment on some level. I entered my work career right out of Morehouse with direct reports, which some folks never have a whole entire career and never have not one person report to them and have to sign a check or worry about a human resource issue. But that has been my entire career. And so from a leadership perspective, given the landscape of the national dialogue around justice and race and injustice and equity and all these other things that really frame why I take a deep breath every day I come into the office or log onto a Zoom, I want to be the kind of leader that is informed by the circumstances that frame what it means to be a leader now, and not a leader 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whenever I entered into higher ed. And so, and basically what I mean is that I continue to model what moral courage looks like. I can't impose upon my Black and brown BIPOC students to have a level of courage that I can't model. I don't want them to demand change that I won't do behind their backs or in the meetings, or as Jeff would say, behind the scenes, advocate on their behalf, even when I'm alone on a thought or on an issue. I have to demonstrate that moral courage that these young people at 18, 19, and 20 as college students do so courageously as they push us as an administration. So I wouldn't call that a missed opportunity as much as I call it something that I am consistently conscious of every day. And I would say one of my greatest accomplishments, at least in terms of my higher ed career for 2 decades, is that I get to make it possible for literally thousands of students to travel abroad, see the world, change almost instantly from having experiences as short as a week abroad to whole semesters and academic years in other countries, learn other languages. And many of those young people are people that look like us. And some of the best moments in an academic year for me is at commencement, when those parents come up to me being dragged by their student. Mom, I want you to meet Dr. Pender. And mom or dad meet me and they go, oh my God, so you're Dr. Pender, you know, and I know what that means because I know they had to scrape and save to get that girl to France for the semester or some other godly place that they went, and they were worried, and I almost know who the parents are because they emailed me to death, like, am I sure this is going to be safe and whatever, but I can just see what transformative experience it was, not just for the student, but the whole entire family and how proud they are of their student. And to know that I had some small part in that evolution of that young person. And then fast forward later, they become diplomats or ambassadors or bankers or lawyers or whatever they become. And the fact that they've had that comparative experience in another country, or they speak in languages or whatever, is just such an amazing thing. And so those are the gifts that keep giving back to me all the time. And so that's just something that I think keeps me motivated. Because I know those are the real sort of at the core, the reasons why we do what we do as educators, is to have those moments at commencement where we can see the pride that these parents have. So for me, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So some of these questions have been answered throughout the course of the commentary. There's one, Anthony Barnett, hey, the husband of one of my best friends from college. Had to shout you out, Anthony. Anthony asks, given that the neighborhood doesn't exist anymore in great part outside of our respective groups, what recommendations do any of you have for today's parents to provide that third party influence that many of you credit for setting your foundations? So, and I was just thinking about that as you were talking. You know, I remember playing in the street all hours of the night with all the other neighborhood kids. You don't see that anymore. So that sort of neighborhood, the reality as well as the concept don't seem to exist by and large anymore. What are some other third spaces or third parties, I guess?
No, I
You can
put my
recommend,
son.
yeah.
Yeah, I put my son in a raft of extracurricular activities. So much so my mother once said to me, "Why do you have him in so much activities?" You know, and I said it's for him to interact with children his age, because the days of going outside and playing on the street are over. And it's also to expose him to other adult figures, who've been vetted and are in positions of authority and are instructors in these different sports leagues and whatnot. So it doesn't matter if the kid, he doesn't have to be the next LeBron Jordan, but sign him up for basketball, youth basketball, and soccer and music lessons.
Was that an intentional slip or what?
Well, LeBron James is a great player, but I'm just saying that as long as the kid is in some structured activity, and that's the other thing I found, that relationships are born out of shared experience. So whereas growing up, we would make lifelong friends with kids on the block. Nowadays, if a kid is on a team or in a league or in a math club or in a band, at least there they'll get the opportunity, hopefully, to build those relationships that will last, because relationships are the network for life. So we need to plant our kids in places where they can have these type of relationships and nurture these type of relationships. So I'd say put your children in every extracurricular activity, and if you can't afford it, look for the ones that are free offered by the Police Athletic League or church or something. But put your kids in organized activities, whether it's sports activities, math club, academic activities, music, arts, theater club, anything.
The irony is Anthony does all that.
I would just say just the intentionality. We were all talking about that earlier at the top of the hour. I know my son probably hates it, and I'm actually already starting to do it with my grandson, but just in some way, just engaging with our kids. I'm a list guy, and I try to keep a list of, because they're things that they're interested in changes so quickly, and having them sort of make a list of, what are you excited about now? What do you want to do now? Like, what's coming up this summer? So it's already February. Let's start planning for summer. What are the top 10 things you think you want to be interested in? I give you a week to think about. I'm only going to invest in 3 things, and they can't overlap. And so in part of talking to them like that, it's almost like it's a board of trustee meeting, but it's you and him or her, and so you're making them think long range planning. They already know it's February. You're only going to invest in 3 things. And then we're going to talk about those 3 things, because if it means driving you from like Conyers to Atlanta, that's out. Or if that is your top, okay, you only might get that one, and other things might be virtual. We know we can do some things virtual now, so maybe you might get a 3rd one because it's free and you can do it online. But just like, it's a fun way to engage, make them a partner in their own development. Those kind of things. So it's not necessarily to answer the question like the third party stuff, because it's community, all these other extracurricular activities, your church, some of these other things, but it's also too just how are you engaging them, right? The discussions that you're having with them, right? Making them their own partner in their own development, making them think, hey, we're gonna come back to the subject next Friday. Maybe every Friday, 7:00 after dinner, we're gonna have a conversation for an hour about you. That means you got 7 days to think about you. Right? And we're going to be serious with it. Bring your paper, bring your pencil, let's talk, let's knock some stuff off. So your list this first Friday might have 20 things on it. Next Friday, the goal is to get it down to 15. The following Friday, the goal is to get it down to 10. Look, by May, I got to start paying. What's the due dates on this stuff? So we're going to work backwards. If the due date to pay is May, the start date for the programs are June, we got some work to do. We're going to have some conversation. So we're going to arrive to this together. It's going to be a shared agreement how we get here, because that's how business works. And if they're 11 and you talking to them like this at 11, by the time they get to college, bro, they know how to do all this stuff. They know how to have meetings. They know what expectations are. They're not unrealistic, and they're not nilly-willy with it. So that's what I got.
Man, it's something excellent. Something excellent, Dr. Anthony, that you said, man. Just through the demonstration that you gave of how to interact, you brought something to mind that I wanted to put out there and throw into this conversation as well. Of course, there's no cookie cutter way of getting this done, because every situation is different. But the way Dr. Pender described that, it tells you something. It tells you that you shouldn't just put your kids in activities where you drop them off, but you have to be involved. So choose activities where you're going to be at the games. You're going to get to know who the coach is. You're going to get to know who the barber is. You're going to get to know who the spiritual leader of your space is. You're going to get a relationship with them, because what that does is it connects you organically to their upbringing. It gives you opportunity to be a part of their growth and development, whether you're dealing with boys or you're dealing with girls. But it also puts you in a space to say, I am here and I am present. Because I'm telling you, from a space of having counseled people for 20 years and having to run schools and being a part of parent-teacher organizations, any kid, any teacher that we've had, whether we've had to go to a meeting and they ended up resigning the next semester, or they ended up having the best classroom experience they've had, over this course of 26 down to 9 years old, there's word on the street in schools, don't disrupt the cars, kids. So they will show up and they will ask for a meeting with every teacher in the school and the principal. But likewise, and that's if you got some issues, but likewise, if you are an excellent teacher, if you're an excellent administrator, they will say, hey, let's make sure that we get the cars kids in our class, because they're going to be the active parents and they're going to be supportive. So that gives you, a dual superpower. You're active and engaged with these activities, but you immediately, when you go in and you sign your kids up, I'm saying it to the brothers out there, the family people out here, community people, you might not have any kids. You might be an aunt or an uncle. You might be a mom and single and doing that. Show up when you get them in these activities where they need a third space. Show up, let them know who you are, let them see you on a regular basis. And then you're able to create a space that works for everybody and helps with their development too.
So I think that touched upon, there was another question, I think, from one of your congregants, Reverend Jeff. Where is it? The question was about, when there are no father figures, how do you go about finding?
Oh, I think I see it. Denise.
Finding them. Yes, yes.
Yeah, she's a female coach of a semi-pro men's team. How can I tell my team the power of them connecting to kids in the community when the truth is some of my guys did not have active fathers? I'm not going to spend a long time on that, because when I pledged, I remembered something. It said, excuses are tools for the incompetent that build monuments to nothing, and those who specialize in them seldom succeed at anything else. People who find excuses are going to be great at making excuses. And if there are people who are open to getting feedback and they want to learn, I always ask two questions when we're dealing with folks, and I'm a straight shooter with this. When people have a trauma story, we all have trauma stories, we all have that. I'm trauma informed and intervention work, that's all important. But there's sometimes when we wear our trauma story on our shoulder and it becomes our story. Well, I didn't have my daddy coming up. Well, I didn't have my mama coming up. And because of this, I detached from people and I didn't go into a space, and you're grown, right? So at some point, I always ask people to ask yourself 4 words. And so what next? So you had this past and you got all of this wonderful trauma. And so what's next? What do you do with that? The second question I ask is from Edwin Gaines, 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. She said, how's that working for you? So if you got kids and you grew up without a dad and you feel like you missed it, how did you feel? How does that work for you? Do you feel you're missing with something? Well, good. Do you feel like it's necessary to consciously inflict that upon another generation of people? If you think that's not a good thing, then go call your child's mama and ask them to let them come to the game with you. You make a step now to correct something that you feel was done wrong. If not, you're consciously participating in passing the next generation of trauma on to somebody else.
Right. That's great. Yes. Important. Because it's easy to stay in that space. It makes us feel tended to in some way, instead of actually doing something about it, because then, you can't kind of lean on that crutch anymore. So I want to, since we are a little over time, technical difficulties, but the final thing I would like you all to weigh in on, if you could only give one drop of sage advice, if you had the ear of every Black young person, and by young, I mean from, cradle to 21, legal adulthood. If you had a bit of sage advice, one bit of sage advice, what would that be? What would you offer to our youth?
That dreams come true. Laws of the Spirit, Dan Millman, he said that as humans, we very seldom fail. We merely stop trying. He said within a 10-year period, you can pretty much accomplish anything you want. And in 10 years from now, you're going to be 10 years older anyway, so go do it. It's really simple. You write down what it is you want to do, the steps it's going to take for you to get there, and go do it. Okay, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple. All right, it's simple. So just go do it. Go do it.
Thank you. Gregory, Jeff, Tony.
I would encourage a person to get involved in an activity that puts them in touch with God, that you know, to join, you know, some type of church or a fellowship or a congregation, something that makes them lift up their vision, lift up their eyes, you know, and not solely concentrate on what's going on around them, and try to strive to, you know, like in AA that talked about the higher power, you know, I believe it's God, but just try to have a relationship with a higher power, with God, to provide you a different perspective, you know, I always tell my son to read his Bible, because I say it's going to make you smarter, that the reading the Bible is going to make you smarter. I can't explain it, but it just does. It'll make you smarter if you read it. And so I would, if I could only give one piece of advice, you said, Sharon, one piece. So,
That's it.
you know, it would be, you know, to try to get the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that comes from God, and because that it has a payoff in this life and in this earthly realm.
All right. All right.
I immediately go back to stuff that my mom and dad, my elders, always said, and it sounds cliche when you're little, but you know, you grow up and you're like, oh, it makes sense. And I think maybe that's probably why they were doing is probably why we do it. I'd say things to my kids and I was like, it was the ghost of my father. I hear it hurt. Yeah, I say it'll come out, I'll respond, and they'll say,
Was
what?
that me?
My dad's been gone. He's transitioned almost 19 years ago, but I still hear these things. So I said, one of the things that he always said, it was an old country saying. He said, pick your friends like you pick your fruit, because it's going to make a difference, man. The people that you put around you, it makes a difference. So if I have one piece of advice to give, that is, be mindful of who you bring into your circle, because that's going to define your character.
Love it. Love it. Dr. P.
Yeah, I got like two. I got one. I got two though. I would say I would probably remind them of their walk of promise, right? And that's connected to something I say all the time, which is that we are everywhere we've ever been, and where we've been is our history as a people. You know, every lesson we've ever learned, every tear we've ever cried, every prayer that's ever been prayed over our life, right? And just with the history and all that, you know, you think about, you know, the Harriet Tubmans and the Martins and the Malcolms, and you know, if it's education, the Mary McLeod Bethunes, the Benjamin Mazes, you know, I'm getting ready to hang up from y'all and watch the Hampton movie about the Black Panther. I mean, you know, our history is so rich with lessons that is our right. That is that history is our reason and our right to walk in our promise. We have no excuse. We have every example of people that have pulled themselves up out of some vile circumstances, let alone mediocre beginnings. There is not an example, an excuse you can give as to why you can't be great and why you can't start all over and be better than you are. Our history is full of those examples, and it's just a walk of promise. And that's all I would say, is to remind yourself of everywhere you've been, and not just your own little life, but you being a person of color, that and all that comes with that in your history. And that's just your reminder of how great you are and what you've been promised. And that promise is your walk. And you walk on that, and the rest is just, it's just, you just take one step and you're walking on promise.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. If you all can just look up at the camera so I can take a screenshot before, I don't know what's going on before we, and thank you very much. So thank you everybody who has hung in there as we went over time for the two times that my computer zonked out. I appreciate all of you coming and listening to these fabulous, fabulous men, and I appreciate you guys Kwame, Greg, Anthony, Jeff. I mean, thank you. Just thank you for saying yes, because
Thank you for having us.
thank you so much. And for everybody who asked questions, thank you so much. And I'm gonna go see what I can salvage out of these recordings, and we will
Jeff,
be in
what was that little fraternity you in?
It was a big one. It was the first one. Well,
you know what?
Okay, it's time for me to go. I know, right?
Y'all, see?
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure.
I know it's time for me to go, Sharon. Thank you so much,
Thank
Sharon.
you so much. Love you guys. Love you, love you, love you.
Thank you, brothers. Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.